Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. Today on the podcast, a thought-provoking conversation with William Meyer on meditation in schools, creating intentional space for connection and building community. In today's fractured world with focus on achievement, grades, and test scores, with rising numbers in teen suicide, anxiety, and depression, meditation can be a potent practice for creating focus and facilitating learning, helping students to develop introspection and greater capacity for compassion and peace. And we definitely need more compassion and peace these days in the world. Longtime teacher and meditator, author of 3 Breaths and Begin, William Meyer shares about his remarkable experience of teaching meditation to his students, fellow teachers, and parents. Bill holds an MA in education from Harvard University and is currently finishing his PhD at NYU. I was actually interested in his dissertation topic. However, we ran out of time to talk about it. Bill also shared how he first got interested in meditation as a middle schooler, regardless of his Catholic background. The power of meditation and mindfulness has become well known in the culture at large. And on this podcast, we definitely have talked about it quite a bit. I would like to suggest a few relevant episodes that might be of interest to you. Episode 109, Mindful Parenting in a Messy World. Episode 176, Teaching Mindfulness to Kids. Episode 181, Letting Go of Negative Thoughts. And episode 89, How to Stop Yelling at Your Kids. I hope you will give it a listen. And now, please enjoy this conversation with William Meyer. And if you want to learn more about him, visit his website, billpmeyer.com. Bill, welcome to Authentic Parenting.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yes. So I'm interested. You discovered meditation when you were in middle school in 8th grade. I have a middle schooler. She's 11. And I tried to introduce to her to meditation and breathing exercises and all of this. She is not interested. And not only that, she makes fun of her mom. So how did you get interested at that young age? If you can share that story with me a little bit.
Absolutely. I think I'm not surprised to hear your own story and this sort of connection with your daughter, effort to connect her to meditation, because I think we sometimes struggle when our parents introduce us to an idea. But for me, it was actually my uncle. So he was maybe one step removed from that core sphere of the family. And I think he must have heard that I think I'd gone to the library and was looking at books about meditation. And I think I had picked up a book by Ram Dass. Mm-hmm. And when he got wind of that, he decided to take me into Detroit. I grew up in Michigan in a suburb of the city of Detroit. And he took me down to Detroit to meet one of his friends who was a Buddhist monk, Zanbo. And when we went down there, we had this really incredible experience. I remember going into the Zen Center, going up the stairs and being led into this room where Zanbo was seated on a cushion, and there were 2 cushions for my uncle and myself. And we sat down and Zanbo poured us some tea, this incredible green tea. And we just sat there. I thought, do I say anything? Are we supposed to ask questions? And Zanbo finally broke the silence and he said something along the lines that it's taken you hundreds of lives to get to this point here to sit across from me. And I was like, whoa. And I think for any middle schooler or adolescent, when someone sort of places your life in a context of that magnitude and that size, it just totally opened up. And from that point on, we had this really profound conversation that led into meditation and talked about mindfulness, and I was hooked. And those practices became a big part initially of just helping me sleep at that time when I was done doing homework. And then they became a part of just things I would do before I had to go to school or go to work or play in sports games. But I think, like, for your own daughter, for me, it was my own frustration or my own feeling like that something wasn't totally complete with what was happening in my life. Like, I wasn't feeling fulfilled necessarily by my schoolwork or the experiences I was having outside of school. And that lack or that desire to search for something else led me to that. And it was my uncle who sort of navigated those waters. So sometimes it's whether it's a teacher or an uncle or a relative or a family friend, it's interesting how as kids we're open to those voices in ways that sometimes we struggle to hear the voices of our parents.
Yes, I completely agree. And how has it changed you, meditation? You've been practicing for so many years, and I know it could be on and off, not regular practice. But I would like to know, as a child, what kind of practice did you incorporate? What did it look like for you? That's number one. And second, when did you start seeing changes in you as a child?
For me, the practice initially was just literally sitting in front of a candle and counting my breath. That was the simplicity of my practice. And then later on, I started to introduce mantras into the practice, and I would use very simple ones. When I would breathe in stillness. When I'd breathe out, I let go. And I would just go with those simple mantras and repeat them over and over and over. The initial benefits, and I think this is really important whenever working with kids or adolescents, is there has to be a tangible benefit. For me, if I would meditate, I'd fall asleep twice as fast. If I would meditate before a game, I seemed to like play better and intuitively know where I needed to be. When I meditated for school, there just seemed to be a sense of ease. So there were immediate changes, I think, that hooked me, which eventually led to these deeper changes, which I now see as I look back on the arc of my life almost 30 years later. And I think the biggest changes for me maybe aren't necessarily a change. It's not that meditation changed me, but it helped me become more me. I just feel a fuller sense of myself when I walk into the classroom when I'm meditating regularly, or I feel more present and more connected to my students or my spouse or my own children when I'm meditating regularly. It's like I'm totally there. Where when I don't have that regularity or I'm not meditating as often, it's like a fragment of myself is there, or things seem more fractured in how the day unfolds. And when I work with students today, I always try to give them something tangible, whether it's just like releasing a worry or a visualization that might give them a little insight into themselves. But I think the deepest change or shift that occurs in a regular practice is just feeling your full self, your whole self being a part of your life, not just a part of yourself. And that was a big piece for me.
How about your parents? Did you tell them that you got into meditation? Did your uncle tell them? What was their perception? I'm curious.
It's so funny you asked that, because it's at the time it never really dawned on me. Oh, what would my parents think of this? And it's only been years later that they've shared their insights. And I think what they saw is just a greater sense or an inner sense of stillness within my presence and my being. And I remember one time sitting in meditation and my dad came into my room. It must have been like, 9:15 or 9 at night as I was getting ready to go to sleep. And he said, oh, sorry. And he left. And years later, he shared that story with me, and he said, when I walked in that space and I saw you sitting on a cushion, staring at a candle, I thought to myself, I think Bill's going to be okay. So they've been very supportive, and I think they always sort of saw me as a little bit of an old soul, whether it was my interest in meditation or history or just sacredness, anything sacred across religions and places. I've just had a deep sense of searching, and they've been incredibly supportive of that. Later on in my life, I had the opportunity to walk the Camino, which is that medieval pilgrimage route across Spain. Traveled to countless places to meditate, to connect to those spaces. And I think they have always just sort of looked at it in wonder and support and curiosity. And that's all I can ask for. And hopefully that's what I can bring to my own son and my own daughter as they grow up. However they find a practice or a way of being in their life that supports that exploration, I just want to support that as well.
But I think I learned about you that you grew up Catholic. Is that right?
That is right. And what's funny is I was teaching just the other day to some high school students. I teach world history to ninth graders, and we were talking about ancient Egypt. And I was making some connections between the Egyptians and the third eye and Hinduism. And a student asked me, if you don't mind, what religion are you? I think he was trying to figure out, where is all this stuff coming from? And I said, yeah, I was raised Catholic, but I find that, and I still feel deeply connected to, I think, the core of Catholicism. I struggle sometimes with the policies and its efforts to move into the 21st century. But I do believe at the core of Catholicism and the core of so many different religions in the world is essence of love that resides at the center. And whether I am Catholic or raised Catholic, but I feel so open and connected to many different faiths and beliefs.
And clearly your parents were open to that as well. Did you go to church growing up while you were meditating in that period of your life?
Yes, I did. And I probably would be a priest today if priests could be married. But
how so?
And maybe in many ways, I've taken that vocation, sort of that spiritual vocation, and brought that into my role as a teacher. But yes, I did go to church, and it was actually my uncle who also introduced me to Thich Nhat Hanh, who in the early 90s wrote a book, Living Buddha, or Living Christ, Living Buddha. And this introduced me to the connections between Buddhism and Christianity and sort of these core beliefs and ideas. And that also became a segue into some of the contemplative traditions within the Christianity in the Western world that mirrored those of the East within Buddhism and the Zen traditions. So in my own work today, I look at a lot at Thomas Merton, who was a modern contemplative monk who died in 1968. And Merton also looked at prayer and turning inward in many ways in the same light as the East does towards meditation. So I think those were things that I explored and helped me access these other tools that maybe on the surface of a Western Christian religious education aren't always presented, but exist in different veins and different lines within the faith. And that's what I used and helped me grow my own practice for sure.
So as a middle schooler, did you see any connection between those going to church and prayer and religious practices and your own practice of meditation, or no? Like as a child, I'm curious. Did you feel guilty? Did you feel different, or you saw this meditation as a completely separate thing that had nothing to do with religion or spirituality, or can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think in some ways I saw meditation as separate initially, but as I began to read more, whether it was I remember at a pretty young age reading the Tibetan book of the living and dying and being so fascinated by it. But as I began to read more religious text and explores the background and the history of meditation and the principles that underlie this practice, I began to see it at first as a separate piece to the Catholic or the Catholicism that I was raised in. But I think actually one author who brought those two pieces together for me at a really young age, maybe in eighth or ninth grade, was Paulo Coelho. And I first read The Alchemist and was so taken by that story that I then went on to read all of his books. And the book, going back actually to the Camino, the book that really struck me or really spoke to me powerfully was his book, The Pilgrimage, which talked about, or it was autobiographical and sharing his story of walking across Spain in the 1980s. And to me, it was like, whoa, here's a guy who's in many ways meditating, he's praying, he's also expressing this and experiencing this through these sacred places in the world. This is something that a way I'd like to model my own life and my own living. And I think he played a role in reconciling those pieces and helping me see how they complemented each other. I don't think at that age developmentally, I would have been able to do that myself. But what's fascinating is so many of the things I initially explored in my adolescence, I find myself coming back to and exploring as an adult, whether it's through my own work and my doctoral work or in my own writing and my own teaching. So when I think about adolescence, when I think about that space of the students I work with and the kids I come across, there really is an incredible opening that exists from about the age of 12 to maybe 16 or 17. And if we as adults can help support that opening and foster the expansion of it within kids with some intentionality, those seeds that they're planting or those curiosities and questions that they're having in those moments of their life, I think that you can spend the next 3, 4, 5 decades of your life making sense of that, as I've found in my own work. And that's pretty powerful. And I think there was some intentionality and guidance from, for example, my uncle, and I try to offer that guidance with students as well. So maybe they can be intentional in what they're exploring, what they're curious about, because who knows how those seeds will grow and those ideas will guide them as they go forward in their own journeys and destinies.
Yes, I completely agree. These are such formative years when I look back at my own life, the teachers, the mentors, the people the neighbor women, right? They impacted, influenced my sense of self and my development in such deep and powerful ways. And the question that I seek today, the direction I chose to take in my life, I completely agree and support that with intention, right? We need to expose our children to such models and people that can influence them, especially in today's culture of TikTok and Facebook and Snapchat and social media. We see a rise in teen suicide, depression, anxiety, and you work with students. I mean, I used to work with teenagers and children. It's crazy. The world today has changed tremendously. Children are experiencing so much pressure to perform, to achieve, the competition. Parents are busy. We are disconnected from one another. The lack of emotional support, it all just accumulates. And I worry sometimes about this today's generation. So tell me a little bit about how did you decide to bring meditation? It sounds like it was natural somewhat, hearing to your story, to bring meditation to the school environment, to your classrooms. how was it received by students, by parents, but by the administration? When was the first time you guys meditated? Give me the scoop.
Give you all the juicy details.
Yes, all the juicy details.
And actually, going back to your earlier point as well, I totally agree. These students are just being swallowed up by a sea of technology and distraction. And while it's all claimed to be connecting and community and friends and likes, the reality is there's very little intentionality. So meditation is one way to find a little stillness, because once you get that stillness, that silence, you can then start to be less reactive and more creative. And it's a very empowering experience for students. And when I first brought meditation into the classroom, in truth, it was a student who brought it to me. And there was a student who I had taught in ninth grade, and he was in 11th grade doing a research project in his science classroom on the benefits of meditation. And he asked if I would like to be part of the study. He knew that I meditated because I had spoken about it when he was a student in my own class. So I joined his study, and when the study ended, there was a small group of students who wanted to continue practicing meditation, and he asked if I would like to join the group. So I did. And that group then formed a club, a very small club. There might have been 6 or 7 students. And I can vividly remember the shift that took place. And I think it was around 2012. There's all these conversations about the end of the world with the Mayan calendar. And I thought, you know what, it'd be fun to guide the students into meditation. So I said to this student, would you be open to me leading one of the meditations? Because at that point, we would just meditate in silence at the end of a period or at the end of a lunch period. And the student said, no, that'd be great. So I led a guided meditation to the group, and it was like, whoa. What just happened here? And we stopped at the end of the meditation, and students shared some of their thoughts and reflections. And I think the next week, a student in that group said, do you think you could lead one of these meditations in class? And I thought, what the heck, I'll try it. It just spread from there. And we have had a meditation every Wednesday at lunch since that first meditation back in 2012. So now we're going on 7 years. And we just had a group of 16 students in my classroom yesterday at lunch with another faculty member who joined us. So the space has ebbed and flowed, but we've always held it since then. And there always seems to be an interest and desire with students. From there, I've had parents ask me to lead meditation circles within the communities. Faculty asked me to lead meditations before department meetings, and the administration's been incredibly supportive. And I credit a lot of that, one, to the fact that this first was organically motivated and began as a result of student interest, but also because I think that the students have had such a positive experience from the meditation, and it's always framed as an invitation. And I've really stripped it of any religious iconography or symbolism or, I guess, artifacts that might connect it to a specific tradition in a way that it seems accessible. And it's a part of the curriculum or a part of the school community where it's not proselytizing or forced upon in any way, just an invitation. And what's incredible about that is I've been asked by the students to lead meditations to whole school assemblies. I can remember leading a meditation for 400 students in the auditorium. I never put that out there. I mean, it comes entirely from the student request and the student interest. And that's been amazing. And parents have been so supportive and so responsive. And it's getting easier to do this work because meditation and mindfulness has become so much a part of the larger discourse that exists that there's more normalcy around it. But even from the get-go, never received a phone call, have never had any pushback from parents or the administration. I really credit that to just presenting it in an open and a non-compulsory way to the students.
So you still work in the same school?
Yes, I still work within the same school, and what's pretty cool is I've had the opportunity now to lead workshops and work with both teachers and students in several other districts about bringing these practices into their schools as well. So I guess there's definitely a benefit of being a known commodity, and I think it can be more challenging when schools bring in outside consultants or outside organizations to lead meditations, because sometimes there's a little hesitance. So, well, who is this? Who are these people? But when it's being led by faculty or being led by people who the students know or the school knows or the community trusts, I think there's a greater openness. And the openness is key, because that's where you see the depth. That's where you see those students really dropping in ways that are even beyond what I've ever seen adults experience or share. Students can go places that we can't. They don't have all those extra layers. So yeah, I have been at the same school in the same community, and that's for sure helped this process and allowed me to do what I do.
It sounds like an open-minded school district. I don't think this can work in a lot of schools, right? In the United States, you probably are in a more progressive area, your school. I'm not sure. Is it a private school or a public school?
It's a public school. And actually, I would say in some ways it's progressive. In some ways it's incredibly traditional. And I wouldn't discredit or discount this in other schools. I think the key, though, is when the parents see me or the parents see what I'm doing, one is I feel like I'm a very strong teacher, and I have a strong pedagogical practice, and I dress the part of what the community would expect of a teacher, whether it's like a tie or button-down shirts. So when I start leading meditation...
So you don't show up like a hippie.
Exactly, right, exactly. It's like, I don't have any of those pieces that would sort of trigger an oppositional response to it. I seem like, oh, this guy's serious, he's focused, he's offering this demanding curriculum. And then when I offer the meditations, we're like, there's a pause to it, but he's still offering this demanding curriculum, and he dresses the part of someone who's looks like what we were expecting. And so I think that's sort of how it's navigated in a way. It's really challenging when you have these other external signals, whether it's what you're wearing that people put people off, or they create sort of a narrative that's what you're trying to put
I know.
forward.
Isn't that interesting about human nature? I mean, right? It's completely like you're the same person, but the perception, the clothing, the appearance makes such a difference. That's how we perceive people, make opinions about people. We believe or trust people, or completely the opposite. I have always been fascinated by that. So that's how you fool the parents, right?
That's right. And actually, I was just talking to Brittany Jacobs, who's the illustrator of Big Breath, the children's book we wrote, which is a guided meditation. And we were having the same conversation, because in Big Breath, the characters, or the way she illustrated and the meditation and the characters in the meditation, there's no peace symbols. There's no like clothing, hippie clothing or alternative clothing. It seems like a traditional student garb, just meditating. And I think that in many ways, if this practice or these ideas are going to reach a broader audience, they have to disarm that initial judgment or whatever predisposition people might have when they see clothing, or they're making conclusions about someone by their appearance. So it's important to be aware of those things and to use them in a way that actually benefits us, to put forth more progressive and open-minded positions and offerings to students.
Yeah, the children's book is a very lovely book, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, the illustrations are very well done, and I really enjoyed reading it. So can you tell me a little more about the meditations that you do with students? Are they guided meditations? How long they are? What's the nature of those meditations?
The majority of the meditations I do with students are guided, and I find that the guided meditation is very effective and accessible to a lot of adolescents. And when I guide a meditation, it usually goes through 3 phases. The first phase being the breath. I always try to bring the students to an awareness of their breath. And from the breath, as the breath begins to deepen, as they become more aware of the breath and the mind begins to calm, I then move them into an awareness of the body. And that might be just slight shifts and changes in their shoulders or their hands or releasing tension from their legs. And then the final piece is dropping them into the visualization. And before this interview, you and I were having a short conversation about the heart. Always bring them into the heart. I love going into the heart space and using imagery of the heart and seeing what they discover in those spaces. And I've guided probably over 400 meditations with kids, and rarely do I lead the same meditation twice. And often the meditation sort of organically finds its place in its form. But those 3 layers of starting with the breath, moving into the body, then dropping into the heart and the visualization is the framework I try to stay with, and I find it's very effective with students. Yes, there have been times I've led just a silent meditation, and there's been times when we've just done meditations of the breath. But to me, the visualization, and I think for most students, the visualization is very, very powerful. I mentioned that as well in 3 Breaths, where I shared a whole host of different forms of meditation with different teachers and parents. But what's so cool about it is now the students are leading the meditations. I actually offer an online class to students across 12 different districts. And one component of that online class on mindfulness is students are expected to create their own guided meditation, which then become the meditations that the students use in the second part of the course. Well, the student who took that class last year is also in my meditation club. And just this past week, she said, "Do you think we could start guiding our own meditations?" And I was just blown away and so excited. I was like, yes, that is awesome. That would be great. And now I get to watch students and listen to students and actually practice with students leading the meditations themselves. So I think because there's the world in which they live in is so visual, I find the visual piece of a guided meditation really speaks to them and allows them to process and make sense of emotions or experiences or relationships in ways that they otherwise aren't able to in their lives. And that's where really some exciting and fascinating work takes place.
Mm. And what are they reporting back? Do they continue meditating at home?
Yes, that's a great question. A lot of them do continue meditating at home. However, they almost always report back that there seems to be a greater energy when they're in the circle or in the space. And I get that because when I'm guiding a meditation for them, 1, I'm holding the space, and 2, I make sure that we're all in like a seated, more open position with our hands on our laps and our feet on the ground versus a cross-legged one. So that energy, that collective energy of the group, I think allows students to go deeper in ways that their own personal practice at home might not. Now, that said, I really feel like it's just about planting the seeds, just as we said earlier. It's planting these seeds because I get follow-up emails from students who've gone on to college where they've actually led guided meditations with their friends at college after like a long hike or before an exam. So they take the practice and it becomes their own, and they're excited to share it with others. But I think initially being able to practice in community has a real power to it. Mm-hmm. What's also incredible about it is after the meditations, I always make sure that there's time and space for reflection and sharing. This is something I mentioned a lot in 3 Breaths. Like the opportunity to share at the end of a meditation is just as important as the meditation itself, I believe. 1, it allows students to process and verbalize things that they're experiencing and seeing within themselves. And 2, it creates a deep sense of community in ways I never would have imagined or are possible in just the classroom through a conversation. And yesterday, after our guided meditation, we went around the group, and I couldn't believe the things I was hearing students share, the vulnerability, the fears, the insecurities. And when students start to verbalize those things and put them into the circle, it disarms them. It makes everyone feel like, oh, I'm not alone in going through these challenges or these uncertainties and dealing with these pressures. And I think that just further is part of that cathartic releasing. And so to me, meditation is just the beginning. It's not the end. It's the beginning of like a deeper sense of classroom connection, a deeper sense of connection with self. And when you offer students the space to share afterwards, that's where the real magic takes place.
Can you share a few examples of what they shared yesterday, perhaps, about their fears and concerns? I'm curious what's on their mind these days.
Yes, one student talked a lot about judgment and the feeling of judgment that was pervasive in her life. It's judgment, both good and bad, but in the meditation, I think I must have mentioned at one point, just let go of any sense of judgment or identifying things as good or bad. And this really struck a chord with her. And she felt this heavy, heavy weight of judgment. And a lot of it, she said, was her own self-judgment. And releasing that or verbalizing that was very healing. Another student was very open in explaining an issue that she was having with her own heart, an arrhythmia, and how much fear was generated by that sense like her heart was beating too fast. And she said in the meditation was one of the first times in the last month that she had been able to sit with her heart, feel her heartbeat, and be okay with that. And that to her was a huge release. And when students start to say these things, it's really like, I mean, it's so powerful as a teacher to sit there and hear that. And it's so inspiring. And what ends up happening is that once a student goes to that place and shares something very vulnerable, every student afterwards goes there as well. It's like there's no going back. And I was able to see that yesterday. And particularly over the last few weeks, I don't know, there's a real shift about what's going on, I think, where students are at. And there must be, I think there's a larger shift just collectively in the world. I mean, you're seeing the leadership role kids are playing around issues like global warming, issues around immigration. And I think kids they're feeling that. And I'm seeing that come out in these reflections and their willingness to go to those deep places because they're seeing that modeled all around them. They are taking on the responsibility in those roles in ways that I think adults are failing them.
Yeah, I think, yes, this generation is an amazing generation, smart, driven kids, motivated, right? Very,
Yes, and questioning and curious and challenging. It's so empowering.
I think perhaps all generations have been like that, but I think this generation to me has somehow more of it. I'm not sure. Maybe I am older generation than the younger. That's how I perceive. But I think they're very smart and intelligent and really amazing. Amazing.
I feel that as well. I absolutely feel that.
And,
yes.
And I'm glad to hear that you provide that space so that they can look inwards and share. You cultivate vulnerability, build community, authenticity, intimacy, and this sharing. I think that's so powerful because as we just mentioned earlier, parents are busy and parents are not usually the ones children will come and open up like that, right? When you are in a different place, it's a bit different. So I'm happy that they have that space, and I wish that could be replicated across the country, across the world, that this is very sacred. This is important work. Today's children definitely need that. That they need that guidance.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was listening to an interview of a musician yesterday, and he was talking about one of his gurus, and he had asked this guru, how should I approach my work as a musician and when I perform in front of audiences at concerts? And this guru had said to him, when you walk into a theater or onto a stage, approach it as if you're entering a temple. And when I heard that, I thought, that is the classroom. Like, this is a sacred space. And it doesn't necessarily mean, and I really assert this or believe this, and I mentioned this even in my book, Three Breaths, you don't have to lead meditations to create a sacred space or a reflective space. But what you do have to do is be authentic, be vulnerable, but hold the space for the students to find reflective outlets, opportunities to connect to themselves and one another. I think that's where that is the real work of teachers and educators and parents. And whether it's the classroom or we create those spaces within our homes for our kids, it's very important that we bring that intentionality into it. And we leave those spaces, or we hold those spaces for them, so that when they're ready to enter those spaces, whenever that may be, they're there for them to enter them.
Oh my gosh, I completely agree. And I can't emphasize that enough, especially in today's go, busy, do, competition driven, accomplishment, achievement driven culture. That can be overlooked, that creating that intentional, mindful space to just be and tune into each other's feelings and just check in with one another, or communicate that you are available for your child. I think I work with parents, and sadly, I see a lot of things happen in children, and parents say, my child is very clingy. What happened? My child is very anxious. My child is this. And then when I ask questions about their life, about their work, typical day, and when you speak with the parent, sadly, it's the life, the reality that they created for themselves. That I'm not saying it creates most of the issues, but it exacerbates, and parents always want to find fault with the child. My child is like this, how can we fix her? As opposed to, let me take a look at my lifestyle. Do we have downtime? Do we pause? Do we sit down and reflect? Do we do all of those things that are getting lost in our day-to-day life? We're driving children to craziness. In my school district, children committed suicide, a few children, because of the pressure, the academic pressure from their parents. And since parents are always asking the park score, this, that, but do we ask other questions, the ones that you explore in those meditations when the space is created? That's what we're losing, and it's sad, and it's impacting our children.
And we're creating spaces. We're just not intentional in the spaces we're creating. And I think, go ahead. Yes.
No, and I don't think we have to do anything special for that. That's what I wanted to say. It doesn't require any special qualifications or tips or knowledge. It's just creating that space and availability and that intention bring forward. That's what we're lacking these days.
And with parenting, and I think teaching, it's very similar in that as teachers and teacher education, the emphasis is always on filling spaces. And as a parent, the pressure is always on creating activities for our child or our children to do. When I think the reality is it's about opening spaces, emptying spaces, holding spaces. So what I try to do in the classroom is, and this is very unsettling for me, is to be willing to create spaces of silence, maybe asking questions and sitting with those questions with the students. And even in my own children's lives, trying to create spaces that are unstructured, unplanned. And that, I think, is so necessary for the growth and development of human beings, not human doings. And what I see on the tail end. So my children are 3 and 3 months, so they're very young, but I see what it looks like when you just keep filling spaces or just keep having long to-do lists for kids, what the outcome is at 17 or 18. At the most extreme, it's exactly as you said, and our community has also been affected by suicide, but I see eating disorders, I see anxiety, rampant anxiety. I see kids who aren't able to sleep at night. I see kids who are terrified by getting into the wrong college, and all of these false identities that they've accumulated that are built around what they do rather than who they are. And I think it's doesn't have to be meditation, but there needs to be a shift back to something or some sense of balance where we create stillness and moments of reflection or connections to nature or just conversations where we look each other in the eyes in the lives of kids. That is so important. That's the thing we should be emphasizing most.
I agree. I was visiting a neighbor the other day, and she has a 3-year-old boy. He had a few dinosaurs and little animals he was playing with, and the mother was supposed to have surgery. I went there to support her, but I also started communicating with this 3-year-old, which I adore, little toddlers. And he was telling me with his broken language about the dinosaurs and the gold digging and the tooth. And I was asking questions, playing with him. And their mother was like, shush, we're speaking. Adults are speaking. Don't interrupt. I said, no. I really enjoy speaking with him. And she's like, I've never seen him like this with any adult. He never goes and talks. I'm like, maybe because other adults are not interested in his little world. This poor little kid. It's just startling to me what I see in my work and in my neighborhood, in my friends. It's just I'm so happy that you speak about this, that we need to create that space, and it's so important for our children to discover who they are. That's the biggest question. And in those formative years, without that space and intentionality, how else are they gonna find themselves in this social media culture of imitation and selfie and stupidity and TikTok and this whole crazy world of imitation and influencers and I don't know, YouTube celebrity stars and being famous, that we need to ground them and hopefully they will know who they are, because the whole podcast and the whole work that I do also is who we are. Who am I? Finding your authentic self, that you can connect to your authentic self so that you can raise another human being, because our children are already authentic and whole and complete. And let's help them to remain true to themselves and to be
that's it.
Be confident in who they are. All this noise distracts them from that, and when they are adults, they are seeking that. They are giving themselves to addiction and other things because that shaky sense of self is a cause for suffering in adulthood.
Absolutely. And I think in education, our role as educators is to help students explore the self. And then it's when they have that deeper sense of self, then they can be of real value to the world, right? They can identify a need that they alone are able to address or bring themselves to. And that's, to me, service in a profound and transformative way. So that whole journey of self-discovery, that to me is at the core of what real teaching and learning is about. And then it's when we discover our sense of self, then we can truly be of service to others. And so much of that is missing within our society today and our system of education.
Let's end our conversation right here, because if we talk about the system of education, we will go on for a couple of hours, because I have strong opinions about it, and I'm positive you might have too.
Yes, I agree.
And so, Bill, I really want to thank you for joining me today for this amazing conversation. I truly appreciate you being present and sharing some of your insights and thoughts and your books and the work that you do. Bravo. I am very impressed and proud, and I hope it can multiply. It's truly very admirable.
Thank you. And so do I. So do I. I really believe like conversations like this just continue to build that energy and that momentum. And I hope to see the work just continue to spread through parents, teachers, and adults.
And that's it for this episode of the Authentic Parenting Podcast. What do you think? I would love to hear from you. Do you meditate? Are you a teacher? Are you interested in this idea of bringing meditation to schools? What is your number one key takeaway from this episode? Let's continue the conversation in our private Facebook community. If you're in it, then that's great. If you're not, you better join us. Unless, of course, you don't have Facebook, like Amber from Australia and many others, which is fine. And I actually wouldn't be personally on Facebook if it wasn't for the Authentic Parenting community. Yeah, that's the truth. Our 200th episode is coming up next week. And confession, I haven't recorded it yet. I am going to. I have a few days. I promise it will air, and it's a solo episode. To celebrate the 200th episode, we're also having a New Jersey, New York meetup. So if you live in New Jersey, in New York, even in Connecticut or Pennsylvania, a driving distance, let's get together. Let's meet one another. Let's have lunch and celebrate. Let me know if you are interested. If you want to get a little more personal information about me, you can definitely follow me on Instagram, Authentic Parenting Podcast. For show notes, contact info, for working with me, and yes, you can hire me to work with you remotely, and I would be thrilled to support you. Visit authenticparenting.com. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show, rate, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Until next week, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.